Vanakkam, Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Jai Hind. We are here once again to think of all those who contributed to the freedom of our country, for acquiring independence, and as we celebrate the Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav, it is our duty to pay homage and respect to these heroes who have made our living joyous and happy. Whom shall we see now? There had been a grand old man of India. Many of us know Mahatma Gandhi is often called the father of the nation. But then Mahatma Gandhi himself called another person the father of the nation and said, "This man is responsible for instilling the feeling of nationalism in the minds of many people." And who was that? That was the grand old man of India, and that was Dadabhai Navroji. Dadabhai Navroji was born on the 25th of June 1908 in the then Bombay, current Mumbai, in the Gatak region of the then Bombay Presidency. His father was Nauroji Palanji Dordi and his mother was Manekbai. It so happened that Dadabhai lost his father when he was merely 4 years of age, and struck with poverty, his mother managed to give education to the son. Though they had to face very hard circumstances, the mother thought it was only education that would save the son and that would relieve all their difficulties. So she made it a point to send the son to the school and also saw to that that son got educated properly. It was customary in those days that people were married when they were only in their teens. The same custom prevailed amidst the Parsi community to which Dadabhai belonged to, and so he was married when he was merely 11 years of age to a girl by name Gulbai, who was just 7 years of age. However, all these circumstances, including the marriage, did not deter Dadabhai from getting educated well. He was brilliant at school, and at that Elphinstone school where his talents were recognized, he was chosen for higher education. We should remember that those were days when not all of them went in for higher education. Secondly, Dadabhai was from a very poor family, and so he could not afford higher education. Because he was very talented and was intelligent, the school authorities, seeing his intelligence, decided that he would be given some kind of scholarship to pursue higher education, and that is how he got educated further. However, when he was in school and college, he was somehow attracted to social renaissance activities, and he himself participated in activities which could help people of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, by 1852, he was quite well educated and was appointed a lecturer in the Elphinstone College of Bombay. It was a moment of pride. You know why? Until then, Elphinstone College did not employ Indians. And here was the first Indian to be appointed a teacher in the college in which he himself studied. As he was a teacher in the college, he got involved in politics. His reason for this involvement was that unless there was a direct involvement in politics, he thought he could not help his fellow men. By 1855, he was invited by a trade company to come over to England and become part of their officialdom. Thinking that moving to London would help him kind of appraise the Britishers of the Indian conditions and would also give an opportunity to meet with the British officials and authorities and talk to them about the conditions of the Indians in their own country, Dadabhai left for England. However, within the next 2-3 years, the company which invited him could not sustain itself, and Dadabhai had to start his own business. He left the company, and by 1859, he started his own business in the very name Dadabhai Naoroji. However, since his mind was always for the country in which he was born, he decided he would be a kind of a sanctuary for all those Indians who had come to England for further studies. He had an income of his own. He could generate money. And there were a lot of Indians who had come to England for studies, and Dadabhai thought he should help those youngsters. So by 1856-57 itself, even before he started his own business, he floated an association called the London Indian Society. This London Indian Society was a meeting place for all those Indians who had come not only to London but to different parts of England for either studies or for job. In 1866, that is about 7 years after he started his own business, and 10 years after he started the London Indian Society, he thought he should expand the society to all Asians. The reason why he wanted to expand is that most of Asia was under British colonization. Today, in the 21st century, many of these facts would be something very curious to you and me. We might think these are weird, but in those days, when the British authorities had colonized most parts of Asia, many of the Asian countries were part of the British Empire, and conditions were similar in almost all these places. If Indians were wanting a kind of a home rule, the same was the situation probably with Fiji, with Burma, and several other places. So Dadabhai thought he should bring all the Asians under one umbrella. And so on the 1st of December 1866, he started the East Indian Society or the East Indian Association. And in the first conference of this East Indian Society on the 2nd of May 1867, he made a fiery speech on the topic, the responsibilities of England to India. Imagine standing on English soil and talking about the responsibilities that the Englishmen have towards India. What amount of courage and what amount of clarity he should have had to think of such a topic and also make a speech amidst thousands of Asians who had gathered there. We can understand what would have gone on in the mind of Dadabhai Navroji then. He was in England. He was doing trade in England, but he was an Indian. He felt for the country. He felt for the Indian people. His very reason for going to England and kind of settling in England was that he could have direct contact with the British authorities and tell them how Indians felt about their rule over the Indians, how Indians felt about being oppressed and suppressed. And in subsequent meetings of the East Indian Society, he spoke on varied topics, including the necessity for Mysore to be given home rule, the expenses of the Abyssinian War, and the ICS examination. Each of these topics had their own significance. The necessity to give Mysore home rule. Let's think of this. Mysore was ruled by the local kings. Mysore was a kind of a kingdom. The reason why Dadabhai thought that there should be home rule in Mysore is that the British authorities were trying to collect taxes from Mysore. So he projected as to why Mysore should be left to the kings and not have any kind of interference from the British. Similarly, when he spoke about the Abyssinian War, his point of view was that the British participated in the Abyssinian War because they thought there was some rift between them and Abyssinia. But the Indians were not involved at all. It was again a paradox that Indians were made to participate, and Indian money, the money which was collected in India by way of taxes and other kinds, was all utilized for the war expenses. So his question was, you wanted to get involved in that war because from your standpoint you were right. But then, were you justified in utilizing our resources for winning a war without giving us due importance and due recognition? And the most important of all was his question on Indian participation in the ICS examination. For those of you who may not know what ICS meant, let us just spend a few moments to get to know what this was. Today we have the Indian Administrative Service and say IAS, the Indian Foreign Service and say IFS, the Indian Police Service IPS, right? Similarly, those authorities who had to participate in the running of the government of India, of course, this was being run by the British, but then to participate and become an official, to get into that official stream, one had to take up an examination called the Indian Civil Service Examination, and that was ICS. Invariably, at that point of time, it was only the British people who took part in this examination, and when they succeeded, they got posted to India. And those were the ones who became sub-collectors and collectors and magistrates and so on. So, Dadabhai Naoroji thought, you're sending officers to India. They do not know the native conditions. They do not even know the native languages. So, make possibility that Indians would participate in the ICS examination. Make it possible for Indians to write the ICS examination so that they themselves can participate in ruling their own country, formulating the rules and regulations, and kind of governance. He started appraising the British authorities that Indians should be part of the ICS system. By 1869, when he got an opportunity, Dadabhai came over to India. 1869 was the year of birth of Mahatma Gandhi, okay? So in 1869, he came to India, participated in several meetings, traveling up and down, telling people that they had a right for home rule. They had a right for voicing their grievances, and they also had a right to get their demands satisfied. He talked about the rules, the regulations, and also about the rights of the Indians and the responsibilities of the British. His balance was well made out. On one side, he said, the rights of the Indians. On the other side, the responsibilities of the English or the responsibilities of the British. When he was traveling up and down in India, There were certain occasions where he was hailed for his work and funds were collected and given to him. In fact, in one of the meetings, the fund given to him was not for anything else, but then as a prize money it was given to him. However, he preferred to utilize all that prize money for the sake of working for the people of India. He went back to England and ran from pillar to post to make people know about the plight of Indians whenever they were sent on some kind of assignment to neighboring areas, when they were sent as workers, and demanded that Indians be given equal opportunities, equal rights, and equal respect. He became a member of the Parliament of England and went to the Parliament to speak for the Indians. He also closely watched the condition in South Africa and even helped the Indians and the Asians in South Africa. His voice was heard well, and today we need to remember Dadabhai Naoroji not only for his contribution, but he was the mentor for several other national leaders whom we remember today. Friends, he maintained the London India Society. It was in this London India Society that people like Sarojini Naidu, Veer Savarkar, and so many of them got to know about what exactly was happening and drew their nationalistic spirit. We've already seen people like Sarojini Naidu, who went to England, came under the patronage of Dadabhai Naoroji. Dadabhai Naoroji was the mentor who was getting all these people under one fold, Madam Kama, Veer Savarkar, T.S.S. Rajan, Sarojini Naidu, and so many of them, and putting them on the path of Indian nationalism. In fact, Dadabhai Naoroji can also be called the mentor of Mahatma Gandhi in a way. Dadabhai Naoroji was also involved in the establishment of the Indian National Congress in 1885 and participated in the first Congress meeting. Slowly, he developed a good friendship with Mahatma Gandhi and continued to work from the English soil for the Indian soil. One example can be given to the kind of commitment that he had. It so happened that once he had to speak at the Parliament of England, and that was a golden opportunity because he had prepared well and he thought that he could speak about India and the necessity for a kind of a home rule in India. It so happened that the marriage of his second daughter was fixed on the same day, to be held on the same day in India. And imagine the father's responsibility to be present at the daughter's marriage in India, but then the Indian's responsibility to be serving the larger Mother India. And Dadabhai Naoroji chose the latter. He did not attend his own biological daughter's wedding, but then he was serving Mother India and speaking at the British Parliament. On the screen now you could see some photographs where Dadabhai Nauroji's participation in the first Indian National Congress in 1885, and here he is with Annie Besant discussing Home Rule. And here you see, this is a street in London, in the Finsbury area of London. It is named after Dadabhai Nauroji, and there you could see the signboard which says, "This street is named after Dadabhai Nauroji, Liberal MP for Finsbury 1892 to 1895, and he was the first Asian elected to the House of Commons." And this is the postage stamp that the Government of India released in memory of Dadabhai Nauroji, the grand old man of India, whom the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi himself, preferred to call the father of the nation. From Dadabhai Nauroji, we move to yet another figure of importance, and this is Madam Sucheta Kriplani. Madam Sucheta Kriplani was born on the 25th of June, of course, in the year 1908. She was born in the Ambala region, which is in the current Haryana state. Her father was a medical doctor by name Surendranath Majumdar. And when Sucheta was just about 10 years of age, she heard about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre from her father and the elders. Sucheta and her sister, both of them, heard about what happened and were deeply pained. They were so deeply pained to the extent that they went to school the next day and then would call their Anglo-Indian friends by abusive names. In fact, Sucheta herself records it. We were so irritated and we were so pained hearing all those things that happened. And when we went to school, when we saw the Anglo-Indian classmates, we felt so agitated that we called them by names. Of course, as children, they could do nothing more. And when they were in school, something else happened. That was when the Prince of Wales visited India, and since the British government was here, there were lots of welcome receptions to the Prince of Wales. So the school in which both Sucheta and her sister were studying was also one of those institutions which gave a grand reception, and all the children were made to go and stand and give reception to the Prince of Wales. She later records, "Today I feel so bad, but that day I could do nothing. As children we had to stand there, but then today I feel so bad and feel sore about having stood there and accorded that reception." As she grew, her maturity also grew. She, of course, was a very shy individual through and through. When she was studying in college, there was a teacher of hers who would all the time make caustic remarks about Indians. This teacher was English, and after a point, Sucheta could not tolerate. So she and her sister would memorize slokas from the Bhagavad Gita, also learn the meaning of those slokas, and every time the particular teacher made some kind of a remark against Indians, they would immediately stand up and start reciting the shlokas and give the meaning of those shlokas, that after some point of time, the teacher stopped making such remarks. After getting educated in Delhi and at the Punjab University, Sucheta became a professor of history in the Banaras Hindu University. She participated in several nationalistic movements, in the civil disobedience movement, in the Satyagraha, in the Quit India movement, and all those movements which Gandhi was spearheading. In fact, she was part of Gandhi's ashram for some time. In 1936, she married J.B. Kriplani, or Acharya Kriplani, as he is even today referred to. Kriplani was 20 years senior to Sucheta, and naturally there was a lot of opposition from both sides for the marriage. Even Mahatma Gandhi opposed the marriage, but Sucheta stood her ground. It is said that when Gandhi asked her to leave the ashram so that Kriplani would not remember her and would forget her, she turned round to Gandhi and asked him, "You think going away from here, I would forget Kriplani and he would forget me? Don't you think that true love can go beyond?" And that is when Gandhi is supposed to have agreed to their marriage. In the August Revolution of 1942, the Quit India movement, Sucheta came to the forefront and she was arrested. Subsequently, during the partition of the country, just around the time of independence, India was partitioned. At that point of time, there were lots of partition riots, and Sucheta went along with Mahatma Gandhi to Navkali to give relief measures to those victims of the Navkali riots. When Mahatma Gandhi saw Sucheta on the ground working for the people, he hailed that Sucheta was the true representative of Indian womanhood. He said, "Here is a woman with extraordinary courage and brilliant character. She adds glory to Indian womanhood," he recorded. Sucheta Kriplani also became a member of the Constituent Assembly of India, and in another historic move, she sang the Vande Mataram song on that midnight of August 14th, 1947. Many of us are aware that on that midnight, Jawaharlal Nehru made his historic Tryst with Destiny speech. We all know that speech, isn't it? Few minutes before Pandit Nehru could start his speech, Sucheta ascended the platform and sang the Vande Mataram song. What a historic occasion And what a point of time that we should think today and feel proud of. Sucheta Kriplani subsequently became a chief minister of the state of Uttar Pradesh. In fact, all our textbooks would record this proud moment and call Sucheta the first woman chief minister of India. Yes, the first woman to become chief minister of any state was Sucheta Kriplani, and she became the chief minister of the state of Uttar Pradesh. Friends, don't we feel proud to have had such personalities like Sucheta? And don't we think that we will have to follow the footprints of people like her and also contribute to the welfare of our nation? In this same line, today we shall also see yet another personality who could also be called a trendsetter. Dadabhai Naoroji was a trendsetter because he was the first to make people aware of the feeling of nationalism. Prior to Dadabhai Naoroji, people did not think about India to have home rule. People were just satisfied, or even if they were dissatisfied, they did not voice their dissatisfaction. They were just keeping numb. But Dadabhai was the first one to say, in spite of any kind of comfort that we may have in the British rule, we still have the right to have our own home rule. Similarly, Sucheta was a trendsetter, and she led the fight for freedom from the front. And now to another trendsetter from down south, from the state of Tamil Nadu, and that is Veerapandiya Kattabomman. Veerapandiya Kattabomman. Kattabomman is a surname, the name of the family. And this particular person had the first name Veerapandiya. Many of you might be aware that the Tamil land was ruled by kings, and one dynasty of kings was the Pandya dynasty. Down south, it is customary for children to be named after these Pandya kings. And this little boy of the Kattabommu family was called Veerapandiya. Veera is courage, and this boy who evinced a lot of courage at his own young age was called Veerapandiya Kattabommu. And his ancestors had established rule around a place called Panjalankuruchi sometime in the 12th century. It is estimated that Veerapandiya Kattabomman belonged to the 47th generation of this dynasty or this clan. His father was Jagaveera Kattabommu and his mother was Arumugattammal. He was born as the eldest, and he had younger brothers. One of his brothers was Kumaraswamy, and yet another brother was younger to Kumaraswamy, and there were also two younger sisters. This Kumaraswamy was often referred to as Oomaithurai. In Tamil, Oomai means someone who cannot speak, dumb. This boy, Kumaraswamy, was a boy of so few words that he was dubbed Oomaithurai. The southern land was subdivided into what are called palayams for the sake of administrative convenience. There were palayams or geographical territories, and these palayams or pollams were kind of governed by the polygar or the palayakarar. There were about 72 palayams in the southern part of the Deccan Peninsula. And one palayam was the Panjalankuruchi palayam, which Kattabomman headed. Kattabomman is supposed to have ascended throne on the 2nd of February 1790. And that was the time when the East India Company was making its inroads into the Indian territory. A little glimpse into what had happened then. The East India Company had come only to trade. They had their trading ports in places like Surat, Machilipatnam, Calcutta, and Madras. These were only trading ports, and they had come here to trade, nothing else. But slowly what happened? In the southern part of the Deccan Plateau, the Nawab of Arcot was in rule. In other words, the Nawab had a large territory, and the Nawab was trying to get a kind of peshkash from the smaller kings and chieftains. Let us understand the situation. There were smaller chieftains or the smaller polygars, and the Nawab had a territory, and the Nawab said, he extended his control over some of the chieftains and polygars and demanded tax. But then the Nawab was not doing anything to the people there. So, between the chieftains and the Nawab, there was a kind of a friction. Some of the chieftains refused to pay tax. Instead of calling it tax, they called it the peshkash. Peshkash means some kind of a gift. It is that the chieftains were gifting the Nawab or paying some kind of collected material. Now, this friction which was going on between the chieftains and the Nawab, slowly East India Company officials poked their nose. What did they do? They kind of went in to a treaty with the Nawab, telling the Nawab, don't worry, we have our own troops, so we can make these troops go there. Wherever there is opposition to you, we can make these troops, we can station these troops and collect the tax on your behalf. That is how the whole thing started. They only collected the tax on behalf of the Nawab. But then they already had their troops here because they had brought in the troops for the sake of trade, and then slowly they knew that they can get this kind of territorial attachment, and they expanded. And in the latter part of the 18th century, there was a kind of a treaty between the Nawab and the East India Company, that the company would take over collecting the tax. The Nawab was so weak that he was not able to do anything. He said, fine, somebody collect the tax for me, and the company came forward. So all this happened in the second part of the 18th century, that is after 1752. So when Veerapandiya Kattabomman ascended the throne, such was the situation. Now added to all this, something else also happened. What was that? There were chieftains, right? So Panjalankuruchi, Veerapandiya Kattabomman, Nerkattum Sevval, Pulithevan, Sivagiri, somebody else, these were all the local Jamindars. Jamindars or the polygars. And then there was, of course, the Travancore Maharaja, and then the Mysore, the king of Mysore, the king of Travancore, the king of Pudukottai, the king of Ettayapuram, and so on. Smaller provinces, smaller polygars, smaller provinces, smaller kings, and then the Nawab. So, what the East India Company people did was to kind of divide and rule. They would help Tipu Sultan attack someone, so that they can divide between Tipu Sultan and that someone. And later on, they will join with that someone to attack Travancore. So it was kind of, A plus B or B plus C, and then B plus C going against A plus B going against C, and so on. All this kind of divide and rule. And that is why in history you read, sometimes the British were friendly with Tipu Sultan, but a few years later, they attacked Tipu Sultan. Sometimes they were friendly with Travancore, but then a few years later, they attacked Travancore. So such was the condition, and they were kind of dividing and ruling, making enemies after enemies. It was at this point of time that people like Veerapandiya Kattabomman rose up and said, no, we will not pay tax. One more thing also happened. Now the East India Company had virtually come in. So sometime around the 1790s, they appointed collectors of Peshkash. Mark this word, collector. The Nawab or the local rulers were not able to collect the tax or the gift. So the East India Company said, don't worry, we are appointing collectors. So they appointed collectors of Peshkash, and collectors of Peshkash slowly became collectors of the districts, and even today in our administrative service, we retain that term and say collector of a district. That was how the collector system started. So the collectors of the Peshkash were appointed by 1792, and in the Tirunelveli area, William Collins Jackson was appointed the collector of the Peshkash. And Jackson demanded Peshkash from Kattabomman. Kattabomman refused. Jackson played the trick. He would request Kattabomman to come for an audience, but then not remain there, move away. And then Kattabomman had to chase him, like wherever he had gone, he had to go behind. And then from there he would move again. So this way, he was continuously giving some trouble to Kattabomman, and by 1797-98, there was a kind of a war between Kattabomman and the British troops. And in 1798 September, Jackson wanted a meeting with Kattabomman, and in a place called Ramanathapuram, a meeting was arranged, and when Kattabomman went there was no proper meeting. Instead, the British authorities attempted to arrest him. Kattabomman escaped from there, but then his lieutenant was caught. Why did Kattabomman try and escape? Because he wanted to get it to safety and oppose the British. From that time onwards, there was some kind of a fight between the two ends, troops of the British and the troops of the Polygar. There were repeated fights, and ultimately in 1799, Kattabomman was caught. In 1799 September, his capital town Panjalankuruchi was part of the conquest by the British. The British rounded Panjalankuruchi. Kattabomman had to escape. He escaped, went and hid himself in the forests of the neighboring area and also the forests of Pudukkottai. Because of the divide and rule, people here, people there, there was some kind of communication. Some people joined hands with the British, and all that happened. Ultimately, Kattabomman was shown off. Here he is hid himself here. He was shown off and he was caught, and subsequently, in a kind of a hearing which was one-sided, the British authorities heard the case and gave a judgment that Kattabomman should be executed. On that particular day, Kattabomman walked to the gallows himself, and the British authorities record the way he walked. He walked with his chest straight. He walked with his head held high, looking at all those people, looking at those people who had shown him off, and then walked to that tamarind tree where he was supposed to be executed, walked there, did not want anyone else to come near him. He himself put the rope, the noose around his neck, and he died. He hanged himself. He put the noose himself. There was no black cloth, nothing. And in that tamarind tree, in a place called Kayataru, he hanged himself. This was in 1799 October, much before the first war of Indian independence in 1857. And today, there are so many folk songs about Veerapandiya Kattabomman. Even today, women of that area, whenever they are pregnant, they go to that Kayataru soil, take a pinch of that soil, and then keep it on their forehead, saying, Kattabomman should be born to them as their sons. And when the child is born, they take the child, take a pinch of that soil, and put it on the forehead of the child, saying Kattabomman would protect the child. Veerapandiya Kattabomman is a legendary name, not only in South India, but should become a legendary name for all of us to remember and pay our respects. Friends, associated with Veerapandiya Kattabomman, we could also think of similar polygars who fought the British. And one such polygar, even earlier to Kattabomman, was Pulithevan. Pulithevan was also a polygar, and his capital town was Nerkattum Chevval. If you see the map of India, you would find that the southern portion is a peninsula and it comes down like that. On the eastern side, close to the coast, near Thoothukudi, is Panjalankuruchi. On the western side, close to the Western Ghats, close to the eastern slopes of the Western Ghats, is Nerkattum Sevval. And Pulithevan was the ruler of Nerkattum Sevval. A similar trick was played by the British. The East India Company wanted to take all that territory. Pulithevan refused, and there were fights between Pulithevan and the British authorities. There was a war of Kalakadu, there was a war of Tirunelveli, and there was also a war of Srivilliputtur. In the initial phases, Pulithevan was successful. He drove away the British troops. And in fact, the British records say that that mud fort of Nerkattum Sevval was so strong and so organized that it was so difficult getting into the fort. There were a kind of, bunkers in the fort where if there was an external conquest, the children and the women could be kept in safety in the bunkers. There is so much of description about how the fort was built, and it was all a mud fort. And Pulithevan was initially successful, of course, with all the ammunition, the kind of fireworks, the kind of gadgets that the British had. They had huge tanks. They had different kinds of guns, which of course the local troops of the polygars did not have. With all that equipment and gadgets, the British slowly destroyed the Indian troops. And it is said that Pulithevan was there hiding in some forest in the Sivagiri area when the news about his hiding there was shown off by someone to the British authorities. The British authorities came there, the British troops came there, but as they came, they could not catch hold of Pulithevan. He is supposed to have gone into a cave and then disappeared. Of course, there are also versions which say he was caught and then he was killed. We really do not know what exactly happened on that ill-fated day, but we only know Pulithevan was one of those foremost people who fought for the independence of this nation. And Pulithevan was 30 years ahead of Veerapandiya Kattabomman. And so it was in the 1760s, 1763 and 64, way ahead. And friends, is it not our duty to remember these people? Not merely remember them, but then get inspired by their stories and histories and derive pride and courage so as to contribute to the welfare of our land. Let us keep these people in our mind all the time and think of these people whenever we face difficulties. We can draw inspiration from them, and we can all the time remember that they are there to help us perform better. Jai Hind.